All right, everyone, we start off today talking about unrest in three different nations, actually. Initially, it was going to be mainly a response to the Iran protests, which I think are perhaps the most geopolitically significant. But you also have, basically revolutions at the moment in Bolivia and Chile within Latin America, so it's fairly significant. There's actually a cat walking down the road at the moment distracting me. What's happened? First, we'll go to Chile because this one is I think a little bit newer. There have been protests for some weeks there, but it now looks like the government has buckled under the strain. People that are calling for various reforms, they want more educational subsidies, mainly, as well as some other things, pensions. Basically, they want to transfer to a more left-wing economy. Government's sane enough to understand that's not a good idea, balked at the idea, and unfortunately, provocateurs have caused a shit there. That's basically my totally far-right extremist view, I suppose. It is funny, though. Looking at it, if you talk to certain people, they're like, well, Bolivia, which is a left-wing regime, is getting overthrown. Military is in charge at the moment. That's a coup. That's CIA. That's fascists. You go to Iran, it's the West meddling again. The United States is trying to kick out the Iranians for world policing reasons. But if you go to Chile, where the government there is at least perceived of as more on the right, and I will explain a little bit of a qualifier for that, that's a legitimate revolution. That's the people rising up and enforcing their will because they're tired of the evils of decadent far-rightism or something. Now, Chile's not a far-right government. Not by the not by the social and fiscal standards that one would think of from from a more libertarian perspective. It would be more like a neocon economy. Well, that's not really far right. That's a step from liberalism, which is why that they're willing to do we'll give you pensions and subsidized healthcare and education sort of thing. The thing is, all those will be provided. They should have just fucking done it in the first place and just said, okay, to hell with it, and let people deal with the economic consequences thereafter. Thing is, Chile at least has one advantage, which is that it has a lot of copper, among other things. It has a lot of industrial goods that it can potentially export, so that can prop up socialism at least for some time, and then later on they can try to put the genie back in the bottle to save their people from disaster. In Bolivia, of course, it's just socialism being replaced with more socialism, and in the nation of Iran, the authoritarian regime there is hazarded now by fuel price hike. I don't understand what the Iranian government was thinking. Any other possibility would have been better than saying, you know what we're going to do in the middle of the night without telling anybody, we're going to double the fuel tax. We're going to cause the price of gasoline to skyrocket so that all those commuters are going to get up in the morning. Some of them are like, I'm trying to budget for the week, I've got to get my chickpeas or something, and now they can't get them because they had to buy extra gas. Can you imagine? This affects farmers too. Gas and fuel prices. You got a bunch of tractors and harvesters you've got to operate, you're fucked. You got to commute 10 miles to work, you're fucked. At some point it becomes ridiculous. You'd think that a nation with enough oil like Iran wouldn't have to target its own gasoline supply, but I don't know, I guess this made sense to somebody. Now Khomeini has come out. This, of course, he's semi-separate from the normal functions of the more technical republic side of the government, I suppose. Comes out and says, well, I back it too. And so now it's basically morphed, though, now into an anti-government protest. And the problem with strong-arm regimes like Iran is that when they're faced with protests over bungling, they made a mistake, they immediately start killing people. We had yesterday, I think, 8 or 9 people dead. There'll be a whole slew of them, I'm sure, killed today. Now they're threatening to send in the security forces, not just the normal police and guardsmen, I guess, that are guarding things now in these urban areas. People are burning banks, which in one case, it's like some people were cheering because it was mislabeled as central bank. I can't remember the name of the town, the city there, but they burned one of these larger banks. It's actually not technically a central bank in the sense of the Fed or something. It's outside of the Western world's economic control anyway. Basically, what you've got is a bunch of safety deposit boxes. If someone's got their grandma's jewelry in there, I guess they're going to have to go digging now to find it. Hopefully, their fireproof room there in their vault. My goodness. But, I mean, I'll say one thing. That's counterproductive because now, the state's going to have to build another bank anyway, so it's just going to cost people their own money. but it's more from initially it was literally just shock and awe sort of. People are like, what the fuck is happening over the fuel prices, and then it quickly grew larger. It is, by the way, telling, and I think it's a good thing. The Iranian people do seem more dedicated than some of their neighbors to protesting corruption. There's plenty of corruption in Iran. Let's not fucking fool ourselves. As to what it would be replaced with, let's say the regime there manages to fall. The people, manage to overthrow the government, probably with an element of the military helping them. The problem is you could have hardline religious rule take over. You could end up with, I realize that Iran is Shia and not Sunni, and so it's a little bit different from what happens in Saudi Arabia or something. You could end up with a hardline theocratic sort of rule. Religious clerics could come in and take things over. You could end up with a military rule, which would arguably be worse, at least short term. You could end up with a far left regime. You'd end up with a reactionary regime. You could end up with pretty much just about anything. A nation like Iran, it seems to be an odd fusion. Like, Iran's an interesting country at the very least, because you have this hardline secularity almost on one end, fighting against this hardline religiosity with this heavy-handed military in the middle trying to govern everything. Be interesting to see how it works out. So Iran is burning at the moment. We'll see how big the protests are today. And then Chile's burning. Their government's basically folded. So they're cleaning house. The government just said, okay, enough is enough. We can have a new constitution. You'll get your pensions, basically. Which will usher in more leftism, I'm presuming. And then in Bolivia, it's not clear what'll happen. What they should do, it'd be interesting if Bolivia ends up going more to the right and Chile ends up going more to the left. And then we can see 20 years down the road what's happened respectively to their economies. I think I'd be betting on Bolivia at that point. And just clear. I hate to point this out to people, but for fiscal reasons, it makes more sense to be a neoliberal or a conservative than it does to be on the actual left. Yeah, even neoliberalism like we have here is better. I mean, here is in the United States, my home country. In the Netherlands at this moment, it's further left here economically, but not really, like in some ways. Actually, cost of living is arguably lower in some aspects. Interesting. It helps when half your country isn't currently frozen. You look at the North American continent right now, it resembles Siberia. People in Florida are like, maybe we'll get a frost for the first time this decade. And the last, of course. There's a lot of revolution going. I think there's still ongoing protests against corruption and so forth in Iraq. I think there are a couple of other countries right now. Isn't Haiti experiencing massive protests too? They're not expecting. I mean, Haiti has mass protests constantly because there is no quality of life. People eat cookies made out of mud when they're kids just so they have something in their stomach. It would be difficult, by the way, in some cases, if your country's impoverished and unstable enough, having a revolution after revolution situation almost doesn't change anything. Other than the fact that for a little while the death toll is higher, everything else pretty much remains the same. The country doesn't really have a functional economy, doesn't really have a functioning infrastructure. All attempts to increase these things and build maybe more of a central, stable government able to administer things, at least, in urban areas, everything has failed in Haiti. It has become the premier slum of the entire world. By the way, it's considered for some odd reason politically incorrect to talk too much about Haiti. People are literally afraid to address the issue. Probably for demographic reasons. Or maybe it's the fact that the Clintons were there for so long and nothing improved, or that the Red Cross never built any of the homes they were financed to build there. Not that it would have mattered, they all would have been burned to the ground by guerrilla warfare and mobs anyway. But at least for a little while, some orphan would have a roof over their head, right before they get carved up and eaten, maybe. It's terrible. I'm not trying to be flippant about it, but the level of instability there is an order of magnitude different from a Bolivia or an Iran, and Chile's been almost first world now for some time, partially on the back of having a more right-wing economic capability than its neighbors, number one, and number two, lots of industrial resources. The sort of mines and ores, the raw materials Chile has are disproportionate to its population density. This is similar almost to the Scandinavian countries. I don't think Chile will collapse even if they become socialistic, or at least not for a long time, because the diversity of the economy and that economic output of industrial goods, it is disproportionate. It's not just an agrarian economy or something. I think that they could make it work for some time. The Problem is that once you get a little socialism in, people clamor for more because the socialism doesn't solve any problems. It doesn't make anyone's life actually better. It's welfare crumbs. Government corruption and bureaucracy will eventually wheedle away at that breadcrumbs you're giving the poor. Eventually, it becomes too little, and people call for more, and then you have more protests, or you have more leftism. Eventually, you become one step from communism, and your economy inevitably is strangulated. This is how leftism will always work. It is a death spiral. That's about all. Peace out.